But I can't see a thing today. I'm like, I know I say that a lot, but today I really can't. It's crazy. I don't know why. Nothing's different today than it was yesterday, but I can't make out any of you. I mean, I know that's Joan because I know her halo, and I know she sits in the second row, and I know that's Jim because I talked to him earlier, and he's in the spot Jim always sits. But if I don't talk to you, it is not because I don't want to. It's because I have no idea who you are. We're just sitting in the back, and I was sitting by Ashley, and up in front of me, I said, "Where's Becky Bell?" And she said, "Right in front of you." And she was literally 4 feet in front of me. I had no idea it was her. So we'll have to see how it goes. But if you want to sneak out, today's a good day. That's what I'm telling you. We want to talk about the supreme question of life. And when I thought about that as a title, that's a broad category, isn't it? Because it sounds like there could be multiple answers to the question. But the truth of the matter is that there are not multiple answers to the question. That there is only one answer to the question. And the passage that we've been studying pretty heavily for the last few weeks, this passage in Colossians chapter 1, Paul makes an attempt to answer that question, to ask and answer, what is the supreme question of life? And I think that we can boil it down to a pretty simple question, and that would simply be, what will you do with Jesus? What will you do with Jesus? There are lots of other questions in life, and some of them are pretty important, but none of them are as important as that one. And what Paul does is he makes a case in these few verses that we read, that Jim read for us twice today, that make an argument for why Christ should be the supreme Lord, not just of our lives, but why he is in fact the supreme Lord of everything. Now, because it's what I call a dense passage, meaning not that it's stupid, but that it is heavyweight. It's a weighty passage. And we would do it an injustice if we made an effort to try to cover it in 1 week, and so we won't. We'll take probably, today's the 3rd, the 10th, the 17th. We'll go through the 17th. We'll talk about this. And this is the Holy Spirit, I think, because sometimes you run across things that just fit together perfectly. And we've been talking about Thanksgiving, and that fell nicely along the lines of our calendar, Thanksgiving. And we're about to talk about the birth and gift of Christ, and that falls nicely within this paradigm that Paul's talking about of Christ being supreme. And when you think about it, we talk about how sometimes we lose track of things and how things become weighted toward the less important and strengthened or less toward the more important. And I think that Christmas be one of those holidays perhaps where we've lost our way a little bit in terms of what it's really about and what the significance of it really is. And so this is really a perfect passage to highlight the greatest gift that God has given us. And so for the next couple of weeks at least, we'll be spending some time talking about the supremacy of Christ. Now, as we go through this, it won't be anything that you've heard before. When we look at Christ, we know that he is the Son of God. We know that he is God himself. We know many of the things that come up around Christmas time, born of a virgin, all these different things that make him not only miraculous, but so much more. Well, Paul goes in depth here and talks about a number of different things that make Christ Lord, that make Christ Christ. And we're going to talk about them all, but we're not going to talk about them all today. Today I want to take kind of just an overview of this section, and then next week we'll officially start to dive into these pieces. You can think of it as kind of a mosaic. You know, I used to have this puzzle, still do probably. I might have given it to Cassie though. It was a puzzle from Disney, and the picture of the puzzle, when the whole thing was put together, was a big picture of Mickey. and it's Mickey in the top hat, classic Mickey. But each one of the pieces was a little tiny mosaic of its own, meaning 3 or 4 pieces went together to make a tiny picture of its own. And so within this big picture of Mickey were all these tiny pictures that could stand alone in and of themselves, but were so much more impressive when you put it all together. I've never finished that puzzle. It's too hard. It's just too difficult. I made a real concerted effort one time and got about 3/4 of it done, but then I was going blind, literally, not so much, but now I understand that better. But anyway, and I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't finish it. And so I tried to kind of pick it up and put it back in the box to preserve the part that I'd finished, because I didn't really want to give up. You know how that is? And my dad would have none of that. That would have sat in our house for a year on a card table until it was completed. But it was difficult. But even though you had these little pictures to go on, it was the big picture that you were really eager to see when it was all said and done. What Paul does is, in this passage, he builds with these small pictures of Jesus, of what he is, of examples, metaphors that go along with what he's done and who he is and what that means to us. He not only talks about what Christ did, but he talks about what that means to us. And so this is quite an expansive chapter, but really, really, at least I think, extremely interesting. There have been many times when I've tried to encourage you and myself to make Christ Lord of your lives. But I've recently realized that the Scriptures don't ask for that. The Scriptures never ask for that. In fact, I couldn't find a single case where anyone is ever asked to make him Lord or has ever made him Lord except God himself. That's Acts chapter 2, verse 36. He says, and it's an interesting passage, God has made this Jesus, whom you crucified, both Lord and Christ. God has made this Jesus, whom you crucified, both Lord and Christ. And so there God designates him as Lord of all and also as Savior. He is, in fact, Lord of all. Where's Pete Martin? Raise your hand, Pete. Right here. Okay, this is for you, buddy. The biblical mandate for both sinner and saint is not to make Christ Lord, but rather to bow to his lordship. He is ever and always Lord. And whether or not anyone acknowledges his lordship or surrenders to his authority, he is Lord. You know who said that? John MacArthur. I'm surprised you didn't know that. I'm a little disappointed. No? Good enough. Good enough. All right. And it's true. The fact of the matter is that what Paul teaches us in this first chapter of Colossians is that it doesn't matter what we do. It doesn't matter what we do. The only thing, let me think about how I want to say this. The only thing that changes is us, right? God does not change. The role of Christ in our lives does not change. It's just a matter of, do we accept the grace that God offers or don't we? Right? And whether we make Christ Lord of our particular lives, well, that would be nice. But it has nothing to do with whether he's Lord or not. That make sense? Christ is Lord because God has made him Lord. Christ is who he is because he's all the things that Paul talks about in this chapter that we read this morning. We see Christ as Lord whether he's Lord of our lives or not. Because of this supremacy, in all things. He should be, I'll ask it in the form of a question. Is he prominent in my life, or is he preeminent in my life? You see the difference? It's subtle. Is he prominent in my life? And I think that you wouldn't be here today, in all likelihood, if he wasn't prominent in your life. But Paul doesn't ask us to make Christ prominent in our lives. He does not ask us to give him a place in our world. He asks us to give him the place in our world. He's never meant to be second fiddle. My dad used to use that expression a lot. Christ is never meant to be second choice. He's never meant to be second option. He's not the backup. He's the only plan. He's the only plan. And what's interesting is that the Lord of all waits for us to decide if we want him in our lives or not. That seems almost ridiculous when you say it out loud, doesn't it? But that's the nature of the relationship. God wants us to invite the Lord of all into our lives. He does not desire for him to be someone that we take on grudgingly, or that we don't take seriously, or that we put below ourselves. Christ is meant to be preeminent in our lives. He is meant to be all that matters. So, does he occupy a place in your world, or does he occupy first place in your world? We have to move away from the idea of what can Jesus do for me? What can Jesus do for me? And we need to move to, am I living in light of his lordship? I hate the idea, literally despise the idea. It breaks my heart, in fact, to think that we have to beg the Lord of all to take control of our lives. Ridiculous. Silly. He is everything. He knows everything. He made everything. He is the image of the invisible God, and he waits. He waits. One of my favorite pictures is that painting of Jesus standing at the door and knocking. Because I think it's such a profound image of that relationship. You know, that he waits. He doesn't bust in the door. He doesn't demand our attention. He doesn't proclaim that we have to accept him into our lives. But rather he says, I love you. And I have this awesome grace package ready to deliver to you. And I have love, and I have joy, and I have hope. Think you might want to take it? Amazing. We don't just add Jesus to our lives. We adore him with our lives. And we do that through our obedience. Through our obedience. All right. Now, the passage that we read twice. All right. You still have it? Do you still have it open? Okay. Bigger nods. I can't catch it. Okay. All right. Okay. Here's what I want to give you today. And it's not going to take long. I want you to think about the things that we've been talking about already. This idea of he is Lord, right? And so it's just a matter of, will we accept our position in surrender? Now that I pound away on a lot, right? I'm always like, surrender, surrender, surrender. And I do that because that's how it has to be. While Christ has the power to demand that we obey, he will not. He will not. And what is lost if we don't? What is lost if we don't? Paul talks about that in this passage as well. He talks about not only the mechanism that brings about our relationship with God and how that works, and how there is a focus to that, and there is a process to that. We talked about that a little bit in Sunday school this morning. How things happen the way they happen because it's how God intends for them to happen, right? And so when we think about that, when we consider that, and we put that, we overlay that onto our relationship with him, then we see that he made all of it possible literally, all of it, possible through Christ. And without him, and without that arrangement, we are lost. Now, we're going to talk about all the things that happen because of who Jesus is. And next week we're going to talk a lot about who Jesus is and how Paul defines him and how that fits into the big picture of the universe and the small picture of the microverse and how he's in every bit of it, not just the big things, you know. He's not just in the hippo and the elephant. Elephant? I don't even know what an elephant is, all right? But he's in the small stuff, the tiny stuff, the micro stuff, the microbe stuff, all of it, made by him. My favorite part of that is when it says not only is it made by him, but it says that it is held together by him. Have you ever known a family that you're pretty sure if that there was that one family member that got plucked out of the mix, the whole family would just explode and burst into flames? We know that kind of family relationship. I always thought my sister was kind of that person in our family, that she always had kind of a hidden strength. My mom, certainly, she got it from her, but they kind of held it all together, you know, and kept everybody where they were supposed to be, things running the way they were supposed to run. And if they weren't in the mix, then things got weird and wacky. I'm not that guy. I'm kind of the chaos causer a little bit, you know. I know that's hard to believe. But the thing is, some of us are mess makers and some of us are fixers. When we look at Christ, it's an understated metaphor because he's the ultimate. He's the ultimate fixer. And in him, all things are held together. I love that, right? So even though everything is made, we talked about the planting of the seed and how we go to bed and plants grow. Now, we know that we have to plant the seed, and that's the only part that we serve in the process. Sometimes we don't even plant the seed. Sometimes it's just a big cosmic accident that stuff grows where we are happy about it growing, but it had nothing to do with it. Now, farmers, on the other hand, they put a lot of time, effort, anxiety into growing things. They spend a lot of time trying to make sure that things go the way they should. But the truth of the matter is, God still controls the entire process. Now, there are things that they can do that will be less effective and things that they can do that will be more effective, but it's still God who raises the sun to shine on crops, and it's still God who brings the rain, hopefully at the right time. If you're from Southern Illinois, you know exactly what I mean, right? Because if rain comes at the wrong time, that's problematic, all right? God does all that, and he does it with or without our input. He just makes it happen, and our salvation is nonetheless a miracle in that he has done all that needs to be done in the providing of his Son to be the sacrifice, the answer to the ultimate question. All right. 7 characteristics. Now, we're not going to talk about them. I'm just going to tell you what they are. And then when you go back and read Colossians chapter 1 for the 3rd time, you'll see them. They'll pop out. And then we'll break them down and talk about them a little bit more as we go along in the next couple of weeks. Here are the 7 characteristics of Christ that Paul points out in this passage. Number 1, he is the image of the invisible God. That's in verse 15. All right? He's the image of the invisible God. Now, we're going to get into that more. We're going to talk about that more, exactly what that means and exactly what Paul meant by that. But you can look at it as if he's saying he's an exact photograph, an exact reproduction. I read something really interesting that I'll share with you today. I read that in old-timey passports, and when I say old-timey, I mean really old-timey, like Roman-type old-timey, you know, that those passports included not only a stamp that when stamped was the equivalent of a photo of the person that was carrying it, but they also carried kind of just a little blurb, you know, just a little couple of lines that said what made you you, meaning what made you distinctive from every other person that might come through the customs line claiming to be Brett Koppel. Well, here's a little something about myself that'll let you know that this is really me. Maybe I would point out that I have brown eyes and brown hair-ish. A little gray these days. Maybe it would point out that my height, my weight. Point out if I have a distinguishing birthmark, which I don't. A tattoo maybe would identify me as being different from you. All right? There's any number of ways, but I thought that was kind of cool that they included that little blurb so that every Cornelius that came down the pike wasn't mistaken to be, the Cornelius, that we find in the book of Acts 10, in chapter 10. So that's how he distinguishes us. Paul gives 7 distinctive characteristics in this section. All right, number 1, I already said. He is the image of the invisible God. That's verse 15. Number 2, he is the firstborn over all creation. That's also verse 15. Number 3, he created all things. That's verse 16. He created all things. Number 4, he is the head of the body, the church. That's verse 18. Number 5, he is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead. That's verse 18. Number 6, he has the fullness of God dwelling in him. That's verse 19. And finally, number 7, and this is an important one, and we're probably going to devote an entire lesson to this one. Number 7, he is reconciling all things to himself. And that's verse 20. He is reconciling all things to himself. The thing about this passage, and I want to read it again, because now that you've got these things to think about, I want Jim to stand up and read it again, if you would. Consider the things that as we read, the things that we've talked about, the idea that Christ is everything, that he's all in all, and the question, what will you do with Jesus? Go ahead, read it again for us. Need the mic? Stand by me.
He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things were created by him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross.
You can stop there because I have a couple more that I want you to read. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 24. Did you get that one? And Ken, would you get Philippians chapter 2, verses 9 through 11? I just want you to leave thinking about this, right? So often, I try to fill up your head with things that I think, this is so good, you're going to love this. Today, I just want to give you some things to think about. Because one of the things that breaks my heart is knowing that there will be some who will leave today who do not know Jesus as Lord and Savior. And I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't understand it. I don't understand why that would be something that you would want to leave on the table. Why, that would be something that you would reject. Why we would say, yeah, God, that's a really good offer, but no thanks. Anybody watch The Price is Right? The Ricky does? Cool. Okay, The Price is Right. The thing I find amazing about The Price is Right, not that many things do I find amazing, but one of the things I do find amazing is oftentimes you get to the very last thing, and people have spun the wheel, and they've gotten to the, what do they call that at the end? Showcase. There we go. Okay, and we get to the showcase at the end, and you know they're both going to be great, right? They're both going to be great, although always avoid the one with the boat, because the boat one is always way more expensive than you think. Okay. Anyway, the thing about it is, they show the first showcase, and then the first person, the person who did the best, I guess, on the show, I don't really know the criteria. The person who did the best gets to choose which showcase he wants, you know? And so this amazing thing will come out, and it'll be like a trip around the world and a new car, because you got to get that part in there, right? I can't do it like that guy. Anyway, there'll be a trip around the world and a new car, and the people will be like, well, I think I'm going to pass that to Jimmy, because I think that he'll enjoy that trip. And it's like, what? Don't pass that? Are you insane? That's amazing. I saw a guy yesterday or the day before that. I can't remember. They all kind of run together sometimes. But he passed up a trip to Iceland. What could be cooler than that?
Nothing colder than that.
Yeah, well, actually, it's not cold. Iceland is misnamed, right? Iceland should be Greenland, and Greenland should be Iceland. Iceland's really beautiful. Clearly, he did not know that. A little more study in geography would have helped out. My point is, how do you pass on a great thing? You have a good thing. What you're being offered might be a better thing, but it might not be. Might never come to pass. You might not win it. There's all kinds of things about it. You know, neither here nor there. Really, I only say that to say this. Never pass a good deal, right? Never pass on a great deal. Never let it go by hoping that something better will come along, because it might not. And I guarantee in this case, what you do with Jesus makes all the difference in the world. Okay, got Philippians 2?
I do.
Read that.
5 through...
No, 2, 9 through 11.
Okay.
We can read 5 if you want. But.
Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus, who, being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even the death of the cross. Now, verse 9. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee shall bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father.
What's that say?
Let me read it again.
Essentially, it says, you can tell me now, or you can tell me later. But either way, we're going to declare Christ as Lord. We've chosen an invitation this morning, an opportunity to consider some of the things we've talked about, maybe think about where you might stand, where you want to be, what you want to take, what you want to leave. Let's stand together as we sing.